Welcome to episode number 42 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. Scott McPherson is the First Responder Program Coordinator for Reboot Recovery. After dealing with his own trauma that came from serving in Desert Storm, Scott joined Reboot in order to help others. Reboot Recovery is a national movement of peer-led, faith-based trauma recovery courses with over 400 locations across the U.S. and 11 countries and over 23,000 graduates. Reboot courses combine the science of trauma recovery with scripturally based conversations to address the faith questions that trauma exposure often catalyzes. Stay tuned for our insightful conversation. Hey, I love hosting this podcast, and having these conversations is always meaningful to me, and I'm hoping you enjoy listening or watching on YouTube as much as I enjoy producing them. I really don't know that you'd like it unless you leave a comment or review. So if you're getting something out of this experience, then drop me a line in the comments or simply leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen from. Our mission is to bring you content that inspires you to develop a culture of wellness for yourself and for your team, because I believe that wellness is not optional. And if you do enjoy this, be sure to subscribe so that you get notifications every time I post new content. Thanks again for listening and for watching. And now here's my conversation with Scott McPherson. Well, Scott, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so good to be able to connect with you today.
Hey, I appreciate it, Conrad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about you. What's your connection to first responders?
Well, I am one. I'm a firefighter EMT for a department outside of Nashville, and previously was a Army infantry officer, led a platoon during Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm for the 82nd Airborne Division. And now I have the honor of leading up the efforts for First Responder Reboot, which is a peer-led approach to recovery from service-related trauma designed specifically for first responders and their spouses.
Awesome. So how long have you been doing this kind of work?
For actually well over a decade now. Reboot started as an effort that was for combat veterans and their spouses at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is just up the road from Nashville. And there was an occupational therapist there who realized that much of what the military was doing to help soldiers coming back from, multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan was focused on post-traumatic stress as a fear and an anxiety-based set of issues. And while that's certainly a significant component, what she realized that was missing was this whole conversation about the soul wounds of combat that they had experienced. The fact that they had established these tighter than blood relationships with other soldiers and Marines, and they had lost some of them. And then they had seen the brokenness of the world firsthand. They had made life and death decisions, some of which didn't work out the way that they wanted to, and nobody was helping them address those kind of questions. And so she and her husband, who was a CEO of a company at the time, started it was really just more of a conversation at the time, but it evolved into a course where combat veterans and their spouses could come together in community with other people who get it and be able to unpack some of their experiences within a course that combined the science of trauma recovery with these scripturally based conversations around some of the major topics that were common to their experiences. So it was things like processing grief and loss in healthy ways. It was talking about guilt and false guilt and shame and regret, talking about identity, talking about forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others. So this combination of a science and faith conversation really hit home with a lot of people. And this effort started to take off, and soon we had multiple courses at Fort Campbell. Then we heard from other military bases. The first one was Camp Lejeune with the Marine Corps. They asked us, they said, well, I don't know what you're doing, but we need it too. Can you come down here and help us set something up? And then it was another, and it's just one military base after another. And so this effort with combat veterans really started to take off and was very effective. And we did that for, I guess we started in about 2010, 2011 in a formalized sense. And then about 2018, realized there was this whole other population of people that needed something similar. And that's the first responder world. And it's not the same as combat, and there's a lot of differences, but there's a lot of parallels too, in that we're making life and death decisions with incomplete information in very compressed time frames. And in some situations, no matter what you do, the situation isn't going to work out the way that you wanted it to. And, what we tend to find is that if we're fixers, right? We are called to calm whatever chaos is going on in someone's life. And so the question becomes, what happens when we can't fix it, when we can't calm the chaos? And we end up either blaming somebody else, or if we can't find anybody else to blame, then we either blame God or we blame ourselves. And all three of those results can be pretty toxic in somebody's life, especially accumulated over time. So that's where we translated what had been so effective in the military context to the culture and the language of the first responder world. And so we still have the military course that's being used all over the country and all over the world, actually, and also the first responder course that I head up the effort on.
So from your vantage point, what is the difference between like a soul wound versus like PTSD, PTSI?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the key issues that I think we need to wrestle with as we're looking at specifically post-traumatic stress in first responders. There's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of parallels, but there's a lot of differences too. So if you're looking for a definition of kind of soul wounds, or what's referred to commonly as moral injury, it's a perceived or actual action witnessing or being unable to prevent actions that transgress deeply held moral values. And the key there is it's both perceived or actual. So it's not necessarily that we did something wrong, although it could be. It could be that we failed to prevent something, or we think that we failed to prevent something, or we failed to prevent someone else from doing something. And you can imagine that there's a lot of situations that applies in a first responder's career. So some of the categories of events that can be the same ones that would produce post-traumatic stress injuries, but the kind of things that I find tend to lead more toward the soul wounds that we talk about are things like critical incidents with unfavorable outcomes, particularly untimely death. It might be that we go on a CPR call for an 85-year-old. You do the best you can. Person ends up passing away. And, you kind of, you take that as being just part of the life cycle. But what happens when it's an infant? What happens when you're on that call that's a teenage suicide because they were being bullied? Now, what happens when it's the family of four going on vacation that doesn't walk away from an MVC, but the drunk who hit them does? Those are ones that tend to stick with you and tend to leave a mark that you just can't put aside and forget about. But it can be other things too. It can be things like betrayal. We put our trust in people. We put our trust in the organization to support us. And what happens if we sense that, they didn't have our back in a situation where we needed them? That can be an example. It can be that we failed to meet our own performance standards. We see ourselves, again, as being 100%. We're going to be perfect every single time. And, if something bad happens, we start doing all the what ifs. What if I'd done this treatment instead of that one first? What if I'd turned at this light instead of that one? What if I'd gotten there a few minutes quicker? What if? And ultimately, none of those have answers to them, but we can get really caught up in the what ifs of situations and eventually end up blaming ourselves in some way, shape, or form for what had ended up happening.
I think one of the examples that we have in our film PTSD 911 is one of the officers that in the film was, talks about how her agency, she felt that her agency didn't have her back when she was off duty. And when she was going through stuff and when she was going through difficult times, no one reached out and that kind of thing. And so could that be considered like a moral injury type of a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And, where I see quite often is when somebody does reach out for help and then, they're asked to turn in their badge or, they're put on the sidelines, removed from the team. Somebody takes the step and it's a hard step to take of saying, yeah, I need help. And then they're, kind of put into another category of people other than being who they, have their identity as, who they are. And that's a really, really hard thing to get over. And that I would put that absolutely in the characterization of betrayal of trust.
So what are some of the processes and things that can bring healing to someone, facing this kind of a moral injury?
Yeah. I think the key is that we have to be open and honest with ourselves, with God, and with others about what we've been through. The commonality with just the way that God created the mind to work is that it works in terms of words. And so as all of these events happen, in many cases, there's so much emotional impact. There's so much sensory impact, whether it's critical incident stress or moral injury. There's all this coming at us, and we don't necessarily know what to do about it. And if we're not intentional, then we can end up in this cycle of what we call deny, cry, numb, and run. We deny that there's anything wrong. That's the first step. That, if you think about it, you could go on the worst call of your life. Somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, how's it going?" And you say, "I'm good, right? I'm fine." And, there's this process of kind of taking what's happened and trying to act like it didn't have an impact. And so we try to cram it way down deep in a box, hoping that it'll never leak out. And then the next call comes and we pack that one in and we pack that one in. And over time, that box can get leaky and it can even bust wide open. And when it does, it starts to have an impact on our life, on our career, on our relationships. And that's when, it can happen pretty suddenly, too, where it just becomes kind of overwhelming. All of these emotions are flowing out. We don't know what to do with them. And as first responders, the only real acceptable emotion is anger. So it tends to come out as anger. And, then we're confused by this and what to do. So we do what we know how to do, which is to numb. And so, that's where alcohol, substance abuse, prescription medications, non-prescription, can be working out. It can be overwork, taking all sorts of overtime shifts. It can be pornography. It can be all sorts of different things that we do to try to numb ourselves and not feel what we've been feeling. And then ultimately that will fail. And when it does, that's where we run. And, it can be running from a relationship, running from the career. And ultimately, the worst form of running is running to suicide. And unfortunately, that's the reality when we start to lose hope that there can be anything else. So to answer your question, what do you do? What we do is we come together in communities, small communities of first responders, all meeting all over the country, and peers lead them through a course where they can explore the impact of their service experiences and what the impact has been on their life, and begin to look at what trauma exposure does to the mind, the body, and the soul, from both the perspective of science as well as some of these scripturally based faith conversations. And you just wanted to say that, this is not pushy, but Scripture does speak directly to the heart of a wounded warrior, directly to the heart of a wounded sheepdog. And so if we can show them how that works and allow them to wrestle with some of these questions, you see over the span of the course, these people just coming to a whole different trajectory in life. And that's a cool thing to be part of.
Why is it so difficult for first responders, especially, to admit these things, and that, so many struggle with, kind of hiding it and keeping it under wraps? Why do you think is that the case?
Well, we see ourselves as being super people. We're supermen, super women, that, we're the ones who are fixing situations. And, so asking for help somehow goes against that whole identity. And, and the reality is that in many agencies, it continues to be the case that there's the attitude of, if you can't take it, just get out and suck it up and drive on. And that just doesn't work. And, that's one of the things that I'm so glad that your efforts and the movie and all the other, folks that you've had on this podcast, they're trying to change that narrative and take a different approach, which recognizes the reality of the impact the career has, and have different ways for people to be able to heal and not just sit there and suffer in silence. And so, yeah, we're fixers, right? We don't want to be the ones who are asking for help, is a lot of what it comes down to. And, there's also fear over, if I do say something, what's going to happen to my career? And that, unfortunately, is too real of a concern for many people even today.
Do you think that attitude is changing slightly, even in the past couple of years?
It is. It's changing. It's slow, but it is changing. And I think as younger generations come in, I think it's going to continue to evolve and change. But it's a slow process. It'd be great if we had a way just to be able to flip a switch and everything shift. But it's going to be more of a kind of a generational shift, I think.
What do you do with someone that doesn't think they have a problem? I was at an event a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a first responder, and this person was like, "Yeah, I'm good," but I could just tell from their body language that, not so much. What do you do with someone like that who kind of puts up that wall and says, "I'm good, I'm fine," that 4-letter word?
Right?
Kind of how you deal with that?
Yeah, ultimately, they've got to come to a place where they're at least willing to be open to listening. I find that the spouse is often the key. That, they're often suffering in silence themselves. They don't have the community around them like we might have at a station. They don't have, those kind of relationships in many cases. And they're seeing it. They know that there's something wrong. And, we go on a bad call, we come home, we don't want to bring that ugliness into the house, so we don't say anything. And, pretty soon that divide in the relationship starts to build, and all the other stuff of life gets poured into it. And, things tend to spiral downhill from there. So oftentimes it's the spouse who will kind of sign up first and basically say, either you go or I'm gone. And that's enough to get them to come. And, you may see them in the back of the room kind of sitting there, and, they're not wanting to be there. They've got the arms crossed. They're really not happy about the whole thing. But then maybe somewhere around week 4 or 5, something clicks, and now they're leaning forward, and now they're engaging in a conversation, at least to a little bit. And then by the end of the course, you see them asking about how do I learn how to lead this kind of course? And so that is a really cool thing to see transpire over time as well. But they got to get there first. And so, sometimes it's a peer. We'll have folks graduate from the course. They've seen the impact on their life, and they're like, hey, man, you need to go check this out. And so they'll come just because somebody else said that they ought to come. But those are a couple of ways. But, ultimately what it comes down to is somebody's got to say, yeah, I want something different. And that is a decision they have to make.
In your notes that you sent me when we were getting ready for this, you said something there about talking about a default response to trauma. What is that, and what did you mean by that?
Yeah, that was the deny, cry, numb, and run that I was referring to before. So yeah, that's kind of, if we're not intentional about these things, that's a natural thing for us to do. So that's why we're trying to equip people with a different set of resources, a different set of tools in their toolkit to be able to respond in different ways that aren't so destructive to their life.
Do you have any pushback from someone who may not be a person of faith or may not, be interested in religion? What is their response to something like this and what you guys offer?
Yeah, we welcome anybody of any faith background, no faith background. And again, remember that we came from a program that was designed for combat veterans, who many of whom are not coming from a faith background either. So we designed the course we're up front and we tell them, this is coming from Scripture. You're going to hear about Jesus. You're going to hear about God. We're going to be talking about scriptural references. They're relevant to the conversation. But it's designed not to be pushy. It's designed to be one that gives people exposure to things that we think are really going to be helpful for them. But we just tell them, look, you take what is valuable for your faith, for your journey, for your faith journey, your journey in life. Take what's valuable for you. And, that's what's really important, is that they're getting from it what they need. And so it's not our agenda. It's really just focused on serving them.
What motivated you personally to get involved in something like this? Was it from some of your own experiences in dealing with these things?
Yeah. I was kind of hoping you wouldn't ask that, Conrad, but So, as I mentioned, I was, Army officer, was in Desert Storm and suffered a back injury, and eventually led to me leaving the service. I wasn't too valuable anymore when I couldn't put 100 pounds on my back and jump out of airplanes and all that kind of stuff. So I really struggled with my identity when I left. I took off the uniform, and then, who was I? And had a series of betrayals in life that really just cut me to the core. And so, one day I found myself in this empty apartment. I had one chair, and I had one of those little plastic outdoor tables sitting there. That was it. And I had done what I knew how to do. So, I know the default response because I was full in the middle of a drinking binge. And I had the bottle on one side, and I had a pistol on the other side of the table. And, fast forward, obviously, I didn't end up doing it. Had a son that I wasn't prepared to leave. And so, I'd been to that place where taking my own life was a real option. And so when 9/11 happened, and now the pace of combat operations really picked up, then, we had soldiers coming back to, particularly at the time, Fort Campbell, from the 101st Airborne Special Forces units that had been doing multiple tours. And, I'd always had a heart for those who serve and for their families. And so I looked for, what is it that I can do to serve them? And that's where I got connected with this effort that was being made to launch what became Reboot, and it just walked alongside them ever since.
And then what kind of compelled you or propelled you to become a first responder?
It was, it's one of those things, maybe it was an early midlife crisis, I guess. I just saw an advertisement and that they were looking for folks to come and do this. And, I missed the military. I missed the camaraderie, the teamwork, the hard situations. And I was like, I could do that. So that's probably pretty much what it was. And, I've been doing it ever since.
So talk about the importance of community. You talked about in your groups that you bring people together in the room. How important is that, and why is that important?
Yeah, it's so important. First of all, because, one of the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress is avoidance and isolation. Right. So, we pull back from everything that our relationships, our friendships, the people that we enjoy hanging out with, the things we enjoy doing. And when we isolate is when we're at our most vulnerable. So if we can pull people out of that isolation and bring them into a community of other people who are going to be real and open and honest, there's not a lot of opportunities to do that. You can't necessarily do that among the station, or at least you're hesitant to do it, So, where are you going to be able to do that? And then for the spouses, it's even more important because they don't have even the work community where they can talk about, what's going on in the house and how this is affecting the family. And, they need that community just as much. So it's a rare thing to be able to gather a group of people together who, they may not have been on the same scenes, but they get each other and, they can appreciate each other's stories and the impact that it's having in their lives. And they just realize, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who is going through something hard. And, let's link arms and do this together. And so that community, I think, is a really valuable part of what a reboot course looks like.
Do you think that having someone, go to a course like this and perhaps then they come back to their station, their police department or their first responder agency, that can then motivate them to kind of become that catalyst for within that agency to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I've had certainly situations like that where people have graduated and gone on to launch, wellness programs for their own department. I had people. One of the things that we love to see happen is folks who graduate now want to learn how to lead. And they become leaders in either on their own in a course, or they come alongside the current course leaders and join them as a co-leader. So, maybe it's not in their station, but they are part of the change now because they're using their own network to say, hey, you need to come check this out. And then also they've got another way to serve and another way to lead. And so, yeah, I think that's a really cool part of what we see happen.
Do you have an anecdote, a story of someone, obviously without, revealing names, things like that, about someone who kind of went through your course that was in a bad spot and now they're in a much healthier place?
Conrad, I can make something up, but the reality, we take confidentiality very seriously.
Of course.
And, that's, I had mentioned that previously, but, this is also a place that's outside of the agency, outside of the chain of command where somebody can go. And so we don't talk about, we talk about it like Fight Club, if you remember that in the movie
Sure.
with Brad Pitt.
Yep.
It's like what happens in Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club, right?
Of course.
That's kind of the approach that we take with reboots as well. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of decline to address that one.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Which I respect that totally. So what's the process of getting someone to one of your groups? What's the process of getting it started? How does that all work?
Yeah. Like I said, we train peer leaders to lead these courses all over the country. And so the first thing that we need is for folks to step up and say, yeah, I'm willing to learn how to lead. And really anybody who is a current or former responder who has a heart for those who serve and is at a reasonably, stable place of healing themselves and is comfortable with spiritual conversations, we can train them how to lead a course. We have everything, all of the video materials, all the printed materials. We supply them with what we call the Reboot Leadership Academy, which is an online, self-paced training program to provide a foundation of knowledge of what it is to lead a reboot course. And then from there, we coach them. So they'll be in a coaching relationship with somebody like myself that has done it a lot and they can lean on for, how do I do this? What do I do about that? Problems, questions, we're there to walk with them all the way through it. And then, once they've got the course set up, then it's outreach is kind of the next thing. How do you make connections with the people who are going to form that first group? And we've got a whole process for that, but it's a lot of legwork and just getting the word out among that community. This, is oftentimes something brand new. And so just letting people know what this is and letting them self-select that they want to be part of it. Once in terms of getting somebody into a course, once they say, yeah, they want to do it, they come to our site, they register, they get their own internet portal. So they've got access to all the materials. We send them a field guide, which is their kind of fill in the blank, place for them to reflect on what they're hearing. And they're up and ready to go.
Is there a way for someone to kind of find out if there was a course in their area?
Yep. Great question. So if somebody goes to rebootrecovery.com/responders and they drop down to the place that says join a course, there's going to be a drop-down box there that lists all of the available courses that somebody can register for. And some of these are virtual. The one I'm running right now is a virtual course. And then a lot of them are also in person in just various communities all over the country. And we've got 2 going on and 2 coming up in Canada now. So that's exciting.
Very cool. Well, thank you for what you're doing and for the work that you guys are doing, not only in this country, but around the world. I think that's important to give people an option no matter where they are. So, yeah, thank you.
Hey, Conrad, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here today, and just again, love what you're doing with the movie, and it really is very powerful, and I just appreciate your efforts in getting the word out, and I'd love to have conversations. Anybody who wants to know more.
Awesome. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Scott at rebootrecovery.com. That's the email. And somebody wants to get that, all they got to do is shoot me a message, and we'll link up.
Awesome. We'll be sure to put that in the show notes. Well, Scott, thank you for being on the program today. And any final words that you want to share?
Just for anybody who's listening, if you're struggling, there's hope. There's a lot of different avenues for, as you're watching this podcast, a lot of different people out there with a heart for responders who know some of the struggles themselves, and they want to be part of the answer. So, don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to try something. If it doesn't work the first time, try something else, but don't give up the fight. And then for anybody who's hearing this and thinking, I might be able to lead that, reach out to me. I want to have a conversation. What we need more than anything else is people who have been there, who are willing to serve their responders of their community. And if that's you, then we've got everything you need to be able to do that, and would just love to have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Scott, for joining me today on the podcast. I'm really glad that we were able to get you on the program. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening and for watching. And remember, you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Be sure to tune in next week for another interview with an amazing first responder leader. Until then, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.